Welcome back to Whence, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. I'm your host, Brother Robert Johnson. This is episode 219. Very quickly, just to mention in the news, I was absent from the Masonic Roundtable this last week. We had summit meetings at work, very big deal, and I couldn't miss those. So those went on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. You guys, I'm sure, can relate when you have those big corporate meetings for large companies that all get together. It was a pretty cool, good times at work with friends and colleagues. But we're back in the swing of things. And plans for the next episode next week. I've got a great special guest come on the program, somebody who I was my liaison into the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, and also a tremendous brother within the York Rite. His name is Brother Patrick Robbins. He's a great guy. I'm really excited to have him on the show next week, and I believe, we're going to be talking about the Royal Arch. He is part of a chartered new Royal Arch chapter that just got their charter this year, and they've done some amazing and exceptional things with this specific Royal Arch chapter. And I wanted to bring him on to give some insight into what makes a successful York Rite chapter and what you guys can take away from his ideas and what they're doing at Keystone chapter. It's just a tremendous organization. Again, you can take away from that chapter to bring back to your chapters and maybe breathe some extra life or some fun into it, but they've got the right stuff going on there. And so I wanted to make sure we got him on to talk about that, any initiatives the Royal Arch Grand Chapter's got going on, and just in general, it's just a great brother to be able to talk to. And I know he is very knowledgeable, and I think you guys will appreciate the things he has to say about the fraternity. He's got great opinions on Masonry in general, and he can talk to a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to Blue Lodge, York Rite, or Scottish Rite. So we will very much value his opinions, I'm sure, and that's next week. So we'll have Patrick Robin on next week, brother companion Patrick Robin. Again, great guy. But for this week, we'll go right into a research paper. So this week being a unique period in between having a really good guest on next week, and I don't have Fratero on this week, I wanted to read a series of posts that actually Brother James E. Frey wrote for the Midnight Freemasons, who is the current worshipful master of Crete Lodge down in Crete, Illinois. I just actually went to his installation not 2 weeks ago, and phenomenal event. Grand Master of the state of Illinois was there, and he was actually the installing marshal. Again, a great time, but Brother James Frey has such a interesting and powerful intellectual look into the more mystical, esoteric, occult side of the craft. And so for the first time, I believe we're going to have all parts. We'll just go right through them, but I think you'll really enjoy it, and they will give you a better understanding of what the Occult Lodge experience is, especially if you are one of the more social brothers who joined for a social fraternity, and you're wondering, what is this esoteric stuff, or what is this occult stuff? I don't understand it. And this should give you a really fair introduction to exactly what that is. So, without any further ado, the Occult Lodge, Part 1. Introduction and Defining a Lodge of the Spirit by Midnight Freemason contributor, Brother James E. Frey, 32nd degree. Introduction of the Occult Lodge. If there is one fact that any Freemason cannot deny, is that the teachings of the craft have produced some of the most influential members of society. It has shaped the foundation of political dynasties, sculpted a variety of artists and writers, and it has produced some of the brightest leaders of the industry. It is clear that Masonry in itself produces self-actualized members of society who have become significant leaders in their fields. Even religious or spiritual leaders have been under the influence of Masonic teachings. Even though the Masonic system has produced Christian leaders such as Reverend Jesse Jackson or the Jesuit priest Father Francisco Calvo, but the Masonic teachings have also produced leaders within alternative spiritual currents. This series will focus on the Western esoteric tradition and its relation to Freemasonry. These occult lodges, as I will refer to them, were prevalent ever since the beginning of the Masonic institution, since the Rosicrucian influence on the Royal Society during the Enlightenment to the Egyptian influence the occult revival of the late 1800s. Over the course of this series, we will address occult connections within Freemasonry, the strong spiritual leaders that it produced, and the infamous masters that dwell in the shadows of the craft. As Masons, it is imperative to show reverence to all things spiritual, to all spiritual teachings, never to take what may be considered sacred to one in a profane or disrespectful way. Defining a lodge of the spirit. Within the Western esoteric tradition, the Occult Lodge can be described as a group of Kabbalists, magicians, alchemists, or hermetically minded members that gather in a group with a common goal of spiritual advancement. These different groups may have a variety of perceptions and beliefs, but what connects them together is the common desire to experience the realm of the spiritual firsthand without subduing to a specific dogma or faith. The Occult Lodge is mythical in both folklore and modern culture. The image of a shadowy cabal of men in black hooded robes in a dark, smoky room doing mysterious rituals comes to mind. Mountains of old leather-bound books filled with forbidden knowledge line shelves along side jars of strange herbs and large pieces of quartz and crystal. What is interesting about this description is how it strikes an archetypal chord in our imagination, but also how accurate it actually is. In the Occult Lodge, the balance of mystical lore and reality is held only in the mind of the beholder, which makes distinguishing fact and fiction difficult. As with a Masonic lodge, the members often live two lives. In one, they are normal members of society with mundane jobs and relationships, but once they are behind closed doors, they transform themselves into the mythos of the Master Mason. Occult Lodge members similarly escape their day-to-day lives to focus their consciousness to inherit a symbol of a being that travels between worlds and glimpses behind the veil of reality. These members meet to converse with angels, summon gods, and transform themselves through ritual to become more than just men, through the embracing of divinity. The Occult Lodge is not a social club. It is not for charity. It is not meant to benefit anyone outside of its sacred circle. Its only concern is the advancement of its members spiritually and to allow them to forge their own spiritual path, to define their relationship with God. But how did the occult currents in the Western tradition adapt a lodge structure? The Occult Lodge at times has very little to do with mainstream Western religions, and even less to do with social clubs, charities, and fraternal organizations that seem to fit into this lodge structure. So how do these occult currents become emerged with the concept of lodge? The answer is Freemasonry. It was through the Masonic influence that these Western esoteric teachings were given the lodge format as they progressed. Part 2, From Operative to Occult. In the recent climate of the literacy outbreak of novels based on the speculation of Masonry, modern culture has begun to accept the doubtful notion that Masonry is the descendant of the medieval Knights Templar, or that it is the baron of some shadowy conspiracy bent toward world domination. But this is only a modern interpretation of a climate of speculation Masons of the 1800s concocted in order to give the Masonic system a romanticized history. But it should be noted that overzealous Masons creating a myth that the craft is traced to ancient origins was a common trend among fraternal groups of the era. It was thought that an elaborate myth of historical connections gave the fraternal group legitimacy. But in the late 18th and 19th centuries, there was a common theme among Masonic scholars creating a legacy connecting the craft to a variety of occult groups such as the Rosicrucians, the Essenes, ancient Egypt, and a variety of other spiritual systems. This was because many of the first members that transformed the craft from an operative guild into a speculative craft were intellectuals of the Royal Society. These intellectuals were under the influence of classical philosophy, which often incorporated the mystical teachings of the medieval ages. This gave many who were interested in occultism through the age of the 18th and 19th centuries the vessel they needed to explore subjective symbolism and determine their own spiritual truths. Because Masonry became an organization accepting many mystical brethren, the occult-minded brethren of the time adopted aspects of Masonry into the developing quote-unquote magical lodges. Primarily, they adopted the lodge structure, finding its organization as both a degree-based learning system and a democratic formation as a sample for developing a harmonious and productive organization. But as speculative Masonry sought to define itself in its early decades of development through its progression of high degrees, so the Occult Lodges defined itself through these high degrees having discrete and secretive groups in which to practice their spiritual paths. Part 3. The Elu Kohen. As the high degrees developed, one of the first occult orders to develop out of Masonry was the illustrious and secretive order of the Knight Masons, elect priests of the universe, more commonly referred to as the Elu Kohen. The Elu Kohen is one of the most serious and prominent of occult societies, given its deeply rooted occult practices as being the active role in the redemption of humanity from its fallen state. Usually reserved for Gnostic clergy, the Elu Kohen is the inner order for most Martinist streams and teaches advanced forms of ceremonial magic. Martinez de Pasquale was the founder of the Elu Kohen and was born in Grenoble, France in 1709. His father had received a Masonic patent from Charles Stuart, King of Scotland, Ireland, and England, dated the 20th of May, 1738, and granting him as Deputy Grand Master the powers to erect temples to the glory of the Grand Architect. This gave him powers as a Deputy Grand Master with the power to establish lodges, and this power was transferred to his son upon his death. At the age of 28, Martinez was a Master Mason, and upon his father's death, he received this charter, and thus formed the Elu Kohen in 1765. The order admitted only Freemasons, but practiced mystical medieval rites involving angels and archangels. These heavily esoteric initiations echoed a Catholic form of ritual and prayer, as well as the use of psalms as a mantra for meditations. Quote, the higher degrees of the order taught such practices as the invocation of various spirits, such as the Shem Ha-Meporash of the Kabbalah, the so-called divided name, as derived from Exodus 14, 19 through 21, celebration of the equinoxes, and similarly higher ritualistic and time-consuming forms of ritual work. End quote. Martinez's vision was a working of a great spiritualized movement within the higher ranks of Freemasonry. Martinez formed his spiritual group during the period of the creation of the high degrees which were being introduced into Freemasonry due to the often found resentment of the high degree systems by Masonic authorities. Martinez chose to create a quote-unquote side organization, which would have a more spiritual character than Freemasonry traditionally had. To this organization, however, he would only admit Master Masons who had taken the additional Masonic degree of elect. The order of Elu Kohen was rumored to have 9, 10, or 11 degrees divided into 3 main classes, followed by a secret grade. Each class of degrees correlated to different aspects of Solomon's Temple. The first class contained the traditional degrees of symbolic masonry, plus an additional degree of Grand Elect or Particular Master. The second class contained the porch degrees of Apprentice Kohen, Fellow Kohen, and Master Kohen. The third class contained the temple degrees of the Grand Master Elu Kohen, Knight of the East, and Commander of the East. The secret doctrine of the order was based mostly on Martinez's only book, The Reintegration of Beings, which is a mystical reinterpretation of the Pentateuch. Martinez's commentary focused on the purifying diet of the Levites and the importance of the exorcism of planetary energies to rise above the evil found in the individual and collectively in the world. The secret grade of the order contained the degree of Rue Croix, a title inspired both by the Masonic and Rosicrucian circles at the time. In this degree of Rue Croix, the initiate is exposed to spiritual realms through magical invocations or theurgy. The candidate is taught to draw the celestial powers into his spiritual aura. By doing so, into the Earth's aura as well. The candidate is taught to interpret certain signs as perceived through auditory and visual manifestations, which the candidate uses to evaluate his own spiritual reintegration into the spirit. The purpose of the Rue Croix degree was to preserve the beatific vision of the repairer, Jesus Christ, in response to magical evocations in order to repair one's own fallen state, and act as an active participant in the redemption of all humanity to repair the first sin of Adam. Martinez perceived God to be a primordial unity that emanated beings from his own nature, until Lucifer, who wanted to exercise his own creative power, fell victim to his own faults, which caused Lucifer and his followers to be forever separated from the spirit, trapped in the material. To resolve this, God sent man, endowed with a state of perfection, to work towards this reconciliation of Lucifer. Adam then fell himself and became trapped in the material realm as a physical and mortal being. So, it is the spiritual destiny of mankind to save both himself and the original creation, which can be accomplished through the inner perfection with the help of Christ, the eternal repairer. Through the rites of the Elu Kohen, the initiate is to enter into relations with angelic entities, which are sympathetic to man's fallen state, who aid him upon a path to reintegrate his spirit away from the material plane into the unity of the spirit. After Pasquale's death in 1774, the teachings of the Elu Kohen were certainly doomed to fade into the mists of history. But a fellow by the name of Wilmermoz desired to preserve the Elu Kohen teachings within the highest degrees of the regime écossais rectifié, or the Scottish rectified rite, more commonly known as the Chevalier Bienfaisant de la Sainte, or the CBCS, which was founded by Wilmermoz in 1774. Part 4. Masonic Magic to Mysticism. During the time which the original Elu Kohen was in operation, Martinez de Pasquale took an apprentice by the name of Louis Claude de Saint Martin. Louis Claude de Saint Martin was born in 1743 to a religious family of minor French nobility. St. Martin was admitted into the order of the Elu Kohen around 1767, but prior to that had been admitted to an unknown Masonic Lodge in 1750, as well as an initiate to the rite of the strict observance in 1773. St. Martin became the secretary of the Elu Kohen from 1768 to 1771. This is where we met Wilmermoz, who was the head of the Elu Kohen Lodge. St. Martin was inspired by the philosophy and teachings of Pasquale and sought to integrate then with the rite of strict observance. The rite of strict observance was founded by Baron Karl Gotthelf von Hund in 1749 and was based on the myth of the direct lineage to the original Knights Templar, which was received by an unknown superior in Paris, 1742. St. Martin became one of the more disengaged with the ceremonial magic of the elect priests and began to wonder if all the magic circles and ritual elements were necessary to experience the presence of God. St. Martin saw one's spiritual path as an internal work, which he called the way of the heart. St. Martin believed that Christ was the Word, or the Gnosis, as written in the Gospel of St. John, and this Word was with man in the beginning, but had been lost. Only through recovery of this lost word could man be whole and reintegrated into the presence of God. St. Martin began to publish his philosophy under the pen name The Unknown Philosopher. Not only did St. Martin have dislike for the ritualized working of the Elu Kohen, he also began to question the necessity of ritual in a Masonic setting as well. In July of 1790, he left Freemasonry in order to focus on his contemplative way of the heart, until his death in 1803. The French Revolution, though destructive for all of France, was equally devastating for St. Martin's path of Martinism. St. Martin had a few disciples, but his teachings survived through a lineage of student-to-teacher oral recountings until 1891, when a student named Gerard Encausse desired to reform the order of Martinism, taking the name Papus. He claimed a succession from Augustin Chebousseau and Henry de Lage, supposedly going back to St. Martin himself. Papus reformed Martinism into a Masonic structure of a series of 3 degrees, which were reminiscent of the craft degrees in Freemasonry, but with a mythical emphasis, usually referred to as an associate, initiate, and SI. This newly organized system of Martinism became associated with the French Gnostic movement and has long been associated with the tradition of the Episcopi Vagantes, or wandering bishops, and Nkase was most certainly made a bishop. The 3-degree system of modern Martinism borrowed Masonic symbolism such as the pillars of Solomon's temple and added Kabbalistic and Gnostic emphasis to lead the initiate deeper into the understanding of nature, of polarity as it occurs in both nature and in the mind of man. There were also some borrowings from the Mark Master degree in order to gain deeper appreciation of the true meaning of the stone that the builders rejected as a symbol for the Christos. This rebirth in Martinism is a part of a larger cultural movement of the time referred to as the Occult Reformation. Part 5. The Occult Reformation. The period existing during the mid-19th century to the beginning of the 20th century saw the rebirth in the Romanticism with the Occult Lodge. This was termed the Occult Reformation, and no other groups embodied this evolution in esoteric practice more than the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn is often considered the most fundamental magical school to come out of the Occult Reformation in the 1880s. This group had extremely close ties to Masonry, not only being founded by Masons, but being founded by the elite Masons of Society Rosicruciana in Anglia. This group of Masons sought to reform Rosicrucianism and create a magical order that was separate from Masonry so women could have equal membership in the mysteries. But this Hermetic order has its origins steeped in a legend and is riddled with mysteries surrounding one of the most prominent Masons of the day, poet and historian Kenneth Mackenzie. Mackenzie became a Mason in 1870 and a brilliant occult researcher, and authored the quote-unquote Royal Masonic Cyclopedia. In 1887, after mastering the Masonic mythos on his quest for a greater light in occult knowledge, it was claimed that Mackenzie traveled across Europe seeking the true lineage of the Rosicrucians. During his time in France, he was initiated through 9 grades of the quote-unquote Gold und Rosenkreuz Order, and was given special permission to take notes on their initiations, forming what would be known as the cipher manuscripts. Upon returning to England, Brother Mackenzie was instrumental in developing the initiatory grades of the SRIA with Brother Robert Wentworth Little, who founded the order in 1867. The SRIA became the premier Masonic organization in London, and because of its esoteric and occult nature, it drew into its ranks influential membership including Dr. William Wynne Westcott, Samuel Little McGregor Mathers, Dr. Robert William Falconard, and Arthur Edward Waite. Westcott and Mathers would be deeply influenced by the SRIA, and with obtaining cipher manuscripts after Mackenzie's death, they would go on to found the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The cipher manuscripts are 60-page outline of magical initiations corresponding to the elemental energies of earth, air, water, and fire, as well as the Kabbalistic and alchemical notes related to each grade. Westcott and Mathers included these manuscripts in the order, incorporating Egyptian symbolism and various grimoire influences, creating a sustainable current of energy that has been used as the foundation for countless occult orders. The first grade of neophyte, 00, is on a general level dedicated to the concept of darkness. In this grade, the initiate is meant to realize he is bound by his own perception of subjective reality, and that he must purify and cleanse his own being in order to shed the influence of his lower self upon a soul. The initiate walks the path dictated in certain chapters of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and divides his spirit from the elemental energies, freeing himself from material influence. The grade of Zelatar, 1-10, correlates to the element of earth. In this grade, the initiate regains the element of earth, but with a new spiritual perspective, and thus begins the journey of regaining his elemental energies to reform his spiritual self. The grade of Theoricus, 2-9, correlates to water, Practicus 3-8 to air, and Philosophus 4-7 to fire. With the elemental energies regained like the god form Osiris, the parts of the self that were once divided are now united into a balanced spiritual being. This new spiritual being is now dedicated to the great work without an influence of creed or religious dogma. Each grade also has Kabbalistic and alchemical correlations that give a tremendous depth to its symbolism and value as an esoteric system. It is at this point the Philosophus engages in the ceremony entitled Portal, which represents the unification of their elemental energies with spirit. This creates the unified pentagram of the individual, a blazing star of ether, united with all elemental forces. The Golden Dawn created such a stir in the esoteric communities that it attracted a variety of influential people from the artistic communities such as actress Florence Farr, poet W.B. Yeats, writer Bram Stoker, poet William Sharp, and bad boy Aleister Crowley. The legacy of the Dawn was short-lived as schisms among members led to the dissolving of the order. Overall, the Golden Dawn tradition is alive, but heavily divided over who should be considered the quote-unquote official Golden Dawn, with egotistic leaders claiming direct contact with the secret chiefs to eminent Freemason Sheikh Cicero with his lineage from Riguardi to a variety of independent temples. The Golden Dawn community is in constant contest with each other. Overall, for the esoteric student, the works of the Golden Dawn are fundamental to the understanding of the Western systems of magic. It was founded by Masons in an attempt to revive and reform Rosicrucianism. They sought to overcome the mundane influence of humanity, only to be destroyed by the lower parts of the human character. Research of the Dawn is important to all brothers who wish to further understand the occult revival, as most esoteric groups to come after are forever indebted to the efforts of Westcott, Mathers, and Mackenzie. Part 6. From Dawn to Darkness. The Ordo Templi Orientis, or the Oriental Temple of the East, or the Order of Oriental Templars, was founded between 1895 and 1906 as an elite invitational group of Masons who established a more esoteric version of the Masonic rites, focusing on sexual energies. The Ordo Templi Orientis was founded by Theodore Reuss, who had a long history of participating in occult and fringe Masonic groups. In 1880, Reuss attempted to revive the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt, and again in 1888, both times failing miserably. Upon this failure, he began to formulate the outline of the OTO with Karl Keller in 1895. Reuss then sought out to legitimize his group by reaching out and becoming active in other streams of esotericism. He soon was introduced to Dr. William Wen Westcott, leading member of the SRIA and founder of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. At the time, Westcott was the Grand Master of the Swedenborgian Rite of Freemasonry and provided Reuss with a charter to form his own lodge dated July 24th, 1901, and a letter of authorization to form an SIRA group in Germany, February 24, 1902. Reuss was also designated an inspector with the Martinist Order in Germany by Gerard and Cassay, aka Papus, who provided him with a charter, June 24th. 1901. Westcott and Papus assisted Reuss with establishing his order. Papus helped Reuss establish the OTO Gnostic Catholic Church, and Westcott assisted Reuss in contacting John Yarker to receive charters for the rites of Memphis and Mizraim, September 24, 1902. By attaining these charters from the leading esoteric and occult leaders, he became legitimized and to create his own order. Reuss based the structure of his order around the Swedish Rite of 10 degrees, inspired heavily around the Templar mythos and the theoretical aspects of sexual magic. In 1910, Reuss became acquainted with Aleister Crowley, British occultist and former Golden Dawn member, while living in London. The story goes that Reuss was reading Aleister Crowley's Confessions and discovered that he had published their supreme secret. He then contacted Crowley and admitted him to the first 3 degrees, and then only 2 years later, Crowley was advanced to the 10th degree and placed as the Grand Master in charge of Great Britain and Ireland. Crowley then wrote the quote-unquote manifesto of the OTO, which described its basic 10-degree system, that the 7th, 8th, and 9th degrees being Kellner's 3-degree system of the Academia Masonica. In 1914, Crowley moved to the United States and began to break away from the Masonic influence of the OTO and began integrating the concepts of his own religion, of Thelema. He then wrote a religious service for this new version of the OTO called the Gnostic Mass. Reuss, the OTO system contained their versions of the degrees of Entered Apprentice, Fellowcraft, and Master Mason, the 4th degree being Holy Royal Arch, and the 5th degree was Scotch Mason. Crowley attempted to work the Masonic-based OTO in Detroit, Michigan, which resulted in the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite declaring them to be clandestine, centered on the basis that the OTO rituals were too similar to Scottish Rite Masonry's own rituals. In a 1930 letter to Arnold Crum Heller, Crowley wrote, quote, "However, When it came to the considerations of the practical details of the rituals to be worked, the General Council of the Scottish Rite could not see its way to tolerate them on the ground that the symbolism in some places touched too nearly that of the orthodox masonry of the lodges. End quote. In 1914, Crowley then fully integrated Thelema into the OTO by rewriting the initiatory rituals and incorporating his own philosophical understanding of the grade work. By rewriting the degrees, Crowley removed most of those symbolic connections to Masonry. He did not rewrite the 4th degree ritual, which remains in its form and structure related to the various Royal Arch rituals of Masonry. In 1920, Theodore Royce suffered a stroke, and communications between Royce and Crowley began to deteriorate. Crowley broke ties with Royce and proclaimed himself outer head of the order. In 1925, during the tumultuous confessions of Grand Masters, Crowley was officially elected as outer head of the order. The majority of the philosophy of the OTO can be summed up by the quote that began Crowley's involvement with Royce in Crowley's Confessions. Quote, "It offers a rational basis for universal brotherhood and for universal religion. It puts forward a scientific statement which is a summary of all that is at present known about the universe by means of a simple yet sublime symbolism artistically arranged. It also enables each man to discover for himself his personal destiny, indicates the moral and intellectual qualities which he requires in order to fulfill it freely, and finally puts in his hands the unimaginably powerful weapon which he may use to develop in himself every faculty which he may need in his work." End quote. Crowley's new OTO system was rewritten into different schools of triads based on the tarot. The entire system is as follows: 0. Minerval, 1st degree, man and brother, 2nd degree, magician, 3rd degree, master magician, 4th degree, perfect magician and companion of the Holy Royal Arch of Enoch, and PI, perfect initiate, or Prince of Jerusalem. Then came the honorary degree of Knight of the East and West. The next school was the Lover's Triad, which focused on active and passive energies of the soul. 5th degree, Sovereign Prince Rosecroix, and Knight of the Pelican and Eagle, Knight of the Red Eagle, and member of the Senate of Knight Hermetic Philosophers. 6th degree, Illustrious Knight of the Order of Kadash, and companion of the Holy Grail Grand Inquisitor Commander, and member of the Grand Tribunal Prince of the Royal Secret. 7th degree, Theoreticus, and very illustrious Sovereign Grand Inspector General Magus of Light, and Bishop of Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica, Grand Master of Light and Inspector of Rites and Degrees. The degrees of the Hermit Triad are of sexual nature. In the 8th degree of Perfect Pontiff of the Illuminati, the initiate is taught masturbation, magical practices. In the 9th degree of Initiate of Sanctuary of Gnosis, the magical techniques relate to traditional intercourse, and in the 11th degree of Initiate of the 11th degree, a form of sex magic involving non-traditional intercourse is taught. The final supreme secret is given in the 10th Rex Summus Sanctissimus degree. Part 7. A New Age. As occult studies entered into the 20th century, its Christian and Kabbalistic influences would fade, and occult leaders sought to recreate mythology they found interesting. With Crowley's achievement in creating his own mythology and esoteric system, it inspired a new age of occult groups who began to form and adopt what they wished with very little Masonic influence. This stream of thought is found within societies today within the New Age movement. New Age has very little to do with Masonry objectively, but subjectively, it still bears important elements of the lodge structure. New Age often includes types of moon worship, herbs, crystals, types of yoga, meditation, and candle magic. This New Age movement has a firm foundation in Wiccanism, the claimed modern incarnation of the traditional Celtic Druidism and shamanism. Overall, the system is dedicated mostly to elemental energies and some selected planetary energies. But what most Wiccans don't realize is that their New Age movement had its origins and had been heavily influenced by Freemasonry, even after every prayer they say, "So mote it be." The founder of Wicca was Gerald Gardner, who was born in 1884 to an upper-middle-class family in Lancashire. During his life, he worked as a civil servant, author, and amateur anthropologist. Gardner claims he was initiated into Masonry at Sphinx Lodge number 113 in 1905, yet no records exist. Gardner claims to have left the Masonic fraternity in 1908 after he had received his ancient craft degrees. Interested only in obtaining the secrets of the craft, he took much of the symbolism and teachings to heart and began elaborating them into a system of his own creation. Gardner worked through the structure of the OTO, becoming the head of Britain. It was there that he began his contact with Aleister Crowley and shared his dreams of founding a Celtic-themed magical society. He paid Crowley £200 to write out the system of modern witchcraft, and thus Wicca was born. Crowley and Gardner used the lodge structure and many of the aspects of initiatory rituals of Masonry and incorporated them into Wicca. Compare these aspects of the Wiccan first degree with that of the entered apprentice degree. The initiate is blindfolded with a cable tow binding them, representative of the umbilical cord of material life, and is conducted to the edge of the magic circle, which, in Masonic terms, would be the lodge room. The initiate is received by the tip of a sword and is told, quote, "It is better that thou plunge your heart upon this sword than enter this circle with fear in your heart, and never to divulge the secrets of your coven," end quote, which is almost identical to the reception of an apprentice. Both groups venerate the four directions and refer to their work as the craft, and there is implements as, quote, working tools. Masonic initiations end with a charge to the candidate or lodge, which is a lecture explaining the historical and symbolic lessons of the grade, while Wiccan initiates end with a charge of the goddess, which shares much of the same purpose. On the third, the master receives the 5 points of fellowship, while the Wiccan, on their third initiation, receives the 5-fold kiss. Even with the almost overwhelming similarities, Wicca is founded and propagated in 1954. The Wiccan first degree focuses on the adoration of worship of the goddess or Mother Earth. It is here you are brought to light in the power of elemental energies, and thus you take your obligations to the coven and are reborn or twice born into your new dedication as a Wiccan. The second degree is dedicated to the masculine god or horned god, taking personification for the Celtic green man or Greek god Pan, which is associated with the sun. It is in this second grade that the Wiccan is given their magical name within the order. The third degree is dedicated to the unification of God and goddess through a symbolic death and resurrection. All three degrees echo Masonic structure and seek to connect themselves to a stream of ancient pagan energy that had been lost for almost 1,000 years. What Wiccanism did, though, was make esotericism mainstream. From this mainstream New Age movement would come a new breed of charlatans, gurus, self-help books, pseudoscience, and attempts to revive long-dead traditions. Part 8. The Electronic Lodge and Conclusion. In this new century, the Occult Lodge has struggled to remain relevant and reestablish itself. Similar to Masonry, the Occult Lodge has found less and less individuals interested in applying themselves to the practical application of their teachings. Many will attest that for some Masonic lodges, it is difficult to find interested prospective members, and even more difficult to convince newer members to abandon their comfy couches with cable TV and high-speed internet and become active in regular attendance at business meetings and degrees. It is even more difficult yet for occult lodges to find interested individuals to proceed through degrees and education materials and to become active in attending ceremonies and meditations. In this progressive material and secular society balanced by the polar opposite of often misguided fundamentalist evangelicalism, the students of esoteric mysteries often have no outlet to connect with people of a similar mind. Many young men join the Masonic Lodge hoping to find those who are occult-minded, but often become discouraged with the planning of pancake breakfasts and the paying of the bills. With the occult in mind, with nowhere to turn, many have turned to the internet. Internet and mail-order occult orders have become quite common. With a wide reach, they can be connected to those who are interested in occultism, with no active groups in the area. The ancient mystical order of Rose-Croix, or AMORC, is one of the more popular orders. This washed-down Rosicrucian system has claimed to be founded by Sir Francis Bacon, but in actuality it was formed in 1909 by Harvey Spencer Lewis. Lewis claimed to be initiated into a Rosicrucian order in France, in which he received permission to transport these teachings in an American order. AMORC tends to appreciate the Egyptian motif and has a fantastic foundation in alchemical symbolism in its system. But over the recent years, it has become more New Age focused. Still though, AMORC, or AMORC, has a plethora of information and education programming available to those who are interested, and for the beginner in esotericism, they are an excellent starting point. But if Rosicrucianism isn't quite your thing, maybe Martinism is. The traditional Martinist order, or the TMO, is considered by many Martinist groups to be the bane of Martinism due to their openness with Martinist teachings and the accessibility to its programs. Martinist teachings focus on being an unknown superior, and they value their discreetness due to its roots in French Gnosticism. But the TMO is open for all to apply, aiding you with teachings rooted in the works of St. Martin. They offer to do-it-yourself mail-order degrees that allow you to make Martinism your own experience. Even many Golden Dawn groups will offer quote-unquote astral initiations on prospective members who are not in travel distance to an active temple. Another education-focused program one could peruse is the Builders of the Adytum, or BOTA. Founded in 1924 by Freemason and occult writer Paul Foster Case, BOTA, or BOTA, has been heavily influenced by both the Golden Dawn and ancient craft masonry. BOTA is organized into regional study groups which focus on the outer porch work, which contains a correspondence program which is rooted in the main aspects of the Western Mystery School Kabbalah, Tarot, alchemy, and hermetics. But after completion of this first order, the student is presented an option to continue into the second order of the porch work. This second order is an initiatic school that uses the tarot as a basis for the aspirant to attain spiritual advancement. Over the years, the Occult Lodge has largely been reduced to outline study and mail-order programs that promise occult secrets but do not provide a community to support one's practical application of this knowledge. But what can Masonry learn from Occult Lodge? Are we doomed to the same fate? With online education programs and Scottish Rite degrees on DVD, it is hard not to recognize that Masonry is following this trend. What can be learned from the Occult Lodge is that we must also provide an esoterically minded Mason with a community open to them using Masonic teachings and symbolism as a spiritual tool. Remember, there is nothing stopping Masonry from being an individual spiritual path except the individual's perception of its symbolism. So, if you get an occult-minded young man interested in Masonry for the quote-unquote mysteries, embrace him like a brother. Chances are good his interest in the esoteric has made him feel shunned by society or church. This might be why he seeks out Masonry, to find that spiritual truth he has not found in any other group. Allow him to make Masonry into a system that promotes their own enlightenment. Young men like this need local lodges to fill the void because the Occult Lodge, for the most part, has faded into obscurity. But still, somewhere, they will always exist. In the dark corners of our mind, in the back of occult shops, or deep in the woods, there are still secret groups dedicated to spiritual awakening. Just as always, they have been hidden in plain sight. All right, an amazing set of pieces there from James Frey. I didn't really want to break them up. I wanted to give them all to you in one shot. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope it blew your mind a little bit. And I think if you were an esoteric Mason, the conclusion there was probably a little bit refreshing. Lots of interesting history within it. So many thanks to Brother James E. Frey for his efforts in decoding occultism for Masons who aren't necessarily occult-minded. Now is the time in the show where I ask you to support the show. So how do we support the show? We have a few different ways. One, of course, is through shopping. You can go to onit.com and pick up some Alpha Brain, click through our links on wcypodcast.com, and use the promo code WCY at checkout. When you do that, you'll get 10% off your order. They send the show back a little bit of money, and that helps keep this show on in perpetuity and keeps all the episodes available to you all the time. Secondly, we also have an agreement with MasonicTees.com, and we also have a great relationship with The Winding Stairs. Brother Juan Sepulveda of the Masonic Roundtable and The Winding Stairs podcast has a ton of amazing artwork that you should go over there and check out right after you finish listening to the show. www.wcypodcast.com. Click support the show. Click through our links to go to all of those places and use the promo code at any of them, WCY, and you'll get that 10% off. In addition, we do have lapel pins. I have money clips. I have a few sets of cufflinks and some tie bars left that we're using to raise money for the program. Please check those out in the limited edition shop. Again, it keeps the show in the air. One of the last things you can do, of course, is to do a direct PayPal donation. So whether you want to donate 50 cents or $1 or whatever it is most appreciated, and you will always get at least a thank you card from me. And for donations of $10 or more, I'm always going to send you a pin. So please keep that in mind, and I thank you in advance. Speaking of books, the book Chronicles from the Future from the author Achilles Sidigos is been delayed over a month. He's freaking out a little bit, but have no fear, the book should be out very soon, and I think we'll all be pleasantly surprised with it. The rumor on the street is it might have been adapted into a graphic novel, which would be really pretty cool, I think, especially if you got to check out the original articles on ancientorigins.net. So with that, again, thank you so very much. Let's go right into Masonic Minute.
There is a parking lot at 713 Chestnut Street in Philadelphia, located at an address which has been the home of two grand Masonic temples as well as the home of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. The second of those buildings was built from the shell of the first after it burned and eventually served as storefronts and a location for civic events. Legendary architect William Strickland designed the first building, an ornate structure with a marble and stone exterior and a distinctive three-story steeple-shaped tower rising from its center. Construction began in 1809 and took 2 years when it became the home of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, as well as serving as a Masonic lodge. A magnificent building for its time, the Philadelphia Masonic Hall was one of that city's landmarks until March 9, 1819. On that evening, as Washington Lodge 59 was meeting there, a chimney fire swept through the building, completely destroying it. No one was hurt, and lodge members saved some property by carrying it out of the building, but much was lost as the fire erupted into what was described as a great conflagration. Reports say the inferno became so intense it was visible in Newcastle, Delaware, 32 miles away. A letter from Rebecca Gratz, a well-known 38-year-old Philadelphia socialite who lived next door, describes the incident in detail. In it, she makes it clear the building might have been saved, but for the fact the volunteer firemen who came to fight the fire were drunk. As the evening progressed and it became clear the Masonic Hall was lost and Ms. Gratz's house was safe, the event became almost festive as Ms. Gratz added fuel to the fire, pun intended, by serving alcoholic beverages to the firefighters. For the Whence Came You podcast, this is Steve Harrison with the Masonic Minute.
All right, so many thanks to illustrious Brother Stephen L. Harrison for his amazing contributions to this program, the Masonic Minute. Always appreciated. Please don't forget to head on over to our bookstore, which just links the book to Amazon.com, and pick up copies of either Freemasons, Tales from the Craft, or Freemasons at Oak Island. I just gave away a couple copies of that book for the fans of the show over the last weekend, and I hope you guys really enjoy those books. I know I did. They're really great. Freemasons at Oak Island is a great read to get you ready for the new season of that Money Pit or Oak Island show that's actually on H2, which Brother Harrison addresses in his book. So it's very fun. It's interactive. You can almost use it as a show guide to help you discern a fact from fiction, if you will. Again, thank you so much to Brother Stephen L. Harrison. Let's go right into this week's Famous Freemason. This week's famous Freemason is Mark Hatfield, born 1922, and he passed away actually just a few years ago in 2011. He was an American politician and educator from the state of Oregon. A Republican, he served for 30 years as a United States Senator and also as a chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. A native from Oregon, he served in the United States Navy in the Pacific Theater during World War II after graduating from Wilmette University. After the war, he earned a graduate degree from Stanford University before returning to Oregon and Wilmette as a professor. While still teaching, Hatfield served in both houses of the Oregon Legislative Assembly. He won elections to the Oregon Secretary of State's office at the age of 34 and 2 years later was elected as the 29th governor of Oregon. He was the youngest person ever to serve in either of those offices and served 2 terms as governor before election to the United States Senate. In the Senate, he served for 30 years and now holds the record for longest tenure of any senator from Oregon. At that time of his retirement, he was the 7th most senior senator as well as the 2nd most senior Republican. In 1968, he was considered a candidate to be Richard Nixon's running mate for the Republican Party presidential ticket. Hatfield served as chairman of the Senate Committee on Appropriations on 2 different occasions. With this role, he was able to direct funding to Oregon and research-related projects. Several Oregon institutions, buildings, and facilities are named in his honor, including the Mark O. Hatfield United States Courtroom in Portland, the Mark O. Hatfield Library at Wilmette University, his alma mater, and the Hatfield Government Center, light rail station in Hillsborough, the Mark O. Hatfield School of Government in the College of Urban and Public Affairs at Portland State University, and the Hatfield Marine Science Center in Newport. Outside of Oregon, a research center at the National Institute of Health has also named in his honor for support of medical research while in the Senate. Hatfield died in Portland on August 7th, 2011, after a long illness. He was a member of Pacific Lodge number 50 in Salem, Oregon. That's it for this week. Please remember to find us on Facebook, follow on Twitter at Whence, and please don't forget to check out the Midnight Freemasons for awesome content like those Occult Lodge pieces. Comes out 3 times a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Please don't forget about the Masonic Roundtable, even when I'm not on it. It's much better when I'm not on it, probably. But anyway, 10/9 Central, every Tuesday, we go live on Google Hangouts. It plays in perpetuity on YouTube, and also we have a audio-only podcast for it as well. And episodes for that usually come out right after the show, shortly after, or the next morning. So again, please don't forget about those. Join us next week when we have a special guest on, brother and companion Patrick Robin, to talk about Royal Arch successes and all things Masonry. So again, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for all of the donations and the pin orders. And with that, I'll talk to you all next week. Stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson.